Cyprus, the Counterintelligence podcast, hosted by IXN Solutions, the company you turn to for corporate counterintelligence expertise and creators of 351X.
Job.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's security meets compliance meets counterintelligence. Brand new, nothing like this out there. It's going to be a fantastic 2026, Dave Turner. I can't wait to get it into the hands of our clients once it's built, and see everybody at NCMS. If you're going to be down there way in Atlanta, we're going to go ahead and have a booth with our partners, FSO Pros. It's going to be amazing. So if you're down in Atlanta in the June timeframe at NCMS, stop in and say hi. Let's give you a demo on 351X, and you'll be able to see version, I think it'll be 3. But without further ado, Dave, as we were conversing just before we hit record, I think we both met our guest, which I'll let you do an intro here, in October of 2009. That seems like yesterday and not 14 years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely been a while, and it does seem like yesterday. Those are some of the better times of my career, where we were all together in Stuttgart and kind of enjoying the Germany life and the European life. But yeah, so I'm really proud to introduce Lee Dale, of course, and Lee and I go back about 14 years. He came to Det 15 at FCA in 2009, and I had just gotten there as well. I think I probably beat him there by 2 or 3 months. And we spent a lot of time on the road together, did a lot of good counterintelligence work, got to know him really well. Those long car rides on the Autobahn is a lot of time to talk and joke around. And, Lee's one of the funnier guys I've ever been around, and certainly one of the smartest guys I've ever been around. So I learned a lot just shutting my mouth and driving down the highway and letting Lee kind of give me some of his wisdom. So, and it was really fun working with him because I learned a lot from him, and then he became my team chief, and learned a lot from him as well. So really excited about this because Lee brings a lot of experience, and he just retired in June after 25 years, just about 25 years in the Army, and has gone on to work at his alma mater. I was going to joke around and call it Florida State, but I won't do that because I don't think anybody else will find that funny. So, but at the University of Florida, obviously Lee is a Florida grad alum and now works there. But what we want to do today is kind of have Lee tell his story, and I think it's really a fascinating story. It runs across multiple commands, NATO assignments, joint assignments. Really, his career was extremely full, and he got to do a lot of things. He got to command, he deploy, do all those things. So I think the audience is really going to benefit from this story. So I will shut up and let Lee get into his story. Lee, welcome.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Jeremy. I definitely appreciate this opportunity to be on the podcast. I've been listening to this and kind of watching what IXN is doing for a while now, and talking with you guys and Joe, and it's really impressive. I'm just really, as I continue to volunteer and work with our foundation and some of the things that we have going on in the background, watching what you guys are doing is really, really impressive, and so I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate the intro. You did me, far more justice than I probably deserve. And I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance because if there's only one person that loves to talk more than Jeremy, and that's me. So this may be a 3-hour podcast. Well, kind of like that warrant officer podcast where you had to break it into multiple. This may be a 5-chapter long podcast. Hopefully not, though. I'll try to be brilliant, be brief, and be gone, as many of my commanders told me. But yeah, thank you. So yeah, 26 years in, I was prior enlisted, kind of, did the thing. Originally, just recently retired, as you said, in June. Ended my career as the command kick-up, as the CI coordinating authority for U.S. Southern Command, before the world changed and before SOUTHCOM actually became incredibly relevant, and CENTCOM 2.0, which is kind of the growing pains they're going through right now. But I got to see the very beginnings of that, but then left on my retirement. As you said, a lot of roles, from NATO to the combat commands to DIA to a couple other things, and to include the Army Field Support Center, the deputy commander there, and some other enterprise level, positions there. I was very lucky. In fact, it was more kind of like, I just happened to be standing in front of the chair when the music stopped, right? So I was very lucky in my career, and I owe a lot to a lot of the people that you guys have spoken with here in your podcast. As you said, now I'm at University of Florida, and so all views are mine and not the university's. So take that take that for what it is. I work in employee relations and engagement. And in a large organization, HR starts to kind of bifurcate and it starts to get into disciplines specific. So, you'll break out into compensation or benefits or leave or whatever. And so they separate out employee relations, and other people that specialize in progressive discipline and leadership, management, advising senior leaders and managers and supervisors at all levels how to deal with troubling issues. You can throw some workers' comp and any of these sorts of things that pop up, to include dismissals and those sorts of things. And so I was able to kind of find that overlap because of having spent multiple decades in the Army as an Army officer, and I was able to kind of convince them that there was overlap, and it's worked out pretty well so far. I've also like many of our members, I'm passionate about counterintelligence. I'm passionate about the United States Army. So I founded, ISAR Intelligence, which is my little consultancy on the side to kind of keep me in the game a little bit, so I can continue to kind of, pursue, having impact back inside the military and the Army, and from a counterintelligence perspective. And so that's been something that's been a learning lesson for me as well too. I think the unifying theme to all that kind of stuff here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Army as I go on, but is, the national security rigor that we put into our careers, it absolutely applies to kind of human capital risk and organizational risk. And I'll go ahead and pause there for a second, and then before I kind of go on.
No, Lee, thank you for that intro. And thank you for your 26 years of dedication and selfless service, not just to you, but your wife, Paulette, and now your teenage son, I believe, which I find crazy to me. But Lee, there's a lot of branches of service out there. 26 years ago, why did you choose the Army?
Great question. And I think, when you're young, you don't know what your limits are, and you don't know what you really can do. You watched Full Metal Jacket a couple times, and so you think you have an idea what basic training is about. You watch Platoon, so you think you know what being in a platoon is all about. And at the time, to be quite frank with you, I didn't think I couldn't hack the Marine Corps. Right? I probably would have gone to the Marine Corps. I look back on it now, and having served a full career with a lot of Marines, and when I would wake up in the morning at 48 and be like, man, I really don't feel good today, and yet that other 50-year-old Marine colonel was just getting off of a 3-hour PT. So I was like, man, thank God I didn't join the Marines. But I don't think I could handle that readiness. So a lot of it was, I was very young. I enlisted first. And I had, I needed discipline. I was a very, kind of a wild child. And so I need that discipline. And so I have family history. My grandfather was one of the first, 10 Special Forces. And so I kind of grew up, with a military family that had served in kind of special mission and those sorts of things. And I had always appreciated that. So the Army was kind of a natural fit, and I kind of went from there. And looking back on it, I came in armor and cavalry. So I enlisted. I got a green to gold scholarship. Came back as an officer. Went back into cavalry. You did the 7th series. And all those sorts of things. Did an ACR tour, etc. And I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed the Army. I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the culture. And this is even before 9/11 and all those things. I mean, I enjoyed it even when it was, the highlight of your year was going to NTC or something, right? I mean, so it was back in those days. And I'll tell you, I'm sitting here today, my son, my wife, we have the life we have today because of service, because of the Army. And I look back on it and I'm like, I'm so much in a better, I'm in such a better position than my, parents were, et cetera. And it's because of service, because of national service. So it was really great.
That's awesome, Lee. I knew you were Cav and Arma before, from the E to the O transition. So those early years, a young Lee Dale, enlisted to officer through the green to gold path as cavalry. How did you end up within counterintelligence then?
So, I did the transition. When I came back as an officer, they have a thing called branch detail. And so at the time, again, it took me a while to kind of fully grow into the adult I was going to become, but I was very much, one of the things I'm kind of proud of is my ability to kind of see strategically and out further, have vision, those sorts of things. I didn't always have that. And I was always kind of like thinking, well, what's the next step? And so I really enjoyed armor as enlisted. I wanted to make sure I went back armor as an officer. The only way you could guarantee your branch was to go branch detail. I didn't really even understand what that meant. Didn't really care. I just knew that I could go back to armor. So I did it. when fast forward a couple of years, I'm getting ready to get out. My squadron commander at the time had a lot of connections and had just left HRC, and it's like, hey, I can get you out of this. You're a great armor officer. And for the first time in my life, I actually, hey, give me the weekend, sir. And for the first time in my life, I actually made a smart decision. And I thought, like, what does a retirement look like as an armor officer? And hey, nothing bad to, there's a lot of great armor officers out there and infantry officers, and they do great things. But I was like, well, what would perhaps give me a little bit more in the future? And military intelligence, kind of went that. And I'd also been talking, and I saw that there were human and counterintelligence. There were these things that had a similarity to it. I really specialize in cavalry. I really enjoyed that. Cavalry is about, right? It's about finding and fixing the enemy, right? It's about going out and finding him, grabbing him by the shirt collar and holding on to him until somebody with a bigger stick can come in and beat him, right? And so that's kind of what, when I was in MI, I realized very quickly I didn't want to be an all source person. That wasn't as attractive to me. I wanted to specialize in a discipline, and CI, it just kind of started to speak to me, in human, because it was about collections. It was about going out, finding things. And at least in my fever dreamed mind, there was an overlap there. And I thought, oh, well, I can continue to go out and find the enemy. And that's what I wanted to do. I always wanted to go out and find the enemy and bring them to justice, or do whatever the tactical task was. And so that's kind of why CI. There was also some deployment reasons, and I got a class, and there was a time during the wars when we didn't have enough human, we didn't have enough CI, and so they were taking CI people and then sending them back to Huachuca to go get a little human training so that they could then get in the back of a striker and then go out and be, human collectors or whatever. I spent a first part of my career, in all sorts, and as a striker brigade too and stuff, turning CI people into humaners. And so after I went CI, I wanted to dedicate myself to like reversing that trend and making sure that we made CI healthier again, and trying to delineate that difference between, while we're two sides of the same coin, it's not the same. And CI people need to specialize. They need to be focused. They need to be trained. They need to have all the resources they need, because counterintelligence is much bigger than just espionage. It is much bigger than just people and things, right? It's we used to always joke, right? It's checkers. It's chess, not checkers, right? And my human friends love it when I say that, but it's chess, not checkers, right? And so I just really became attracted to it, right? And I was able to kind of continue that through kind of these national level jobs that we did, working even multinational CI, sensitive operations across multiple continents like you, and 50 plus countries, and all these kind of things. And then later in my career, being able to kind of integrate the technical aspects of CI, the cyber, some human, signature reduction, all these things, kind of bringing that into an operational paradigm. And that really, it just really made me so happy. And it was just, it's a really interesting field. There's so much more that's going on, and people even can imagine sometimes.
Yeah, Lee. So, listening to that story, and you and I have kind of similar backgrounds. I was a green to gold guy too, but I was prior MI enlisted. So I didn't get to do the combat arms transfer thing. So I think the Army made a really good decision. I think you made a really good decision when you got into counterintelligence, because, I think you have the kind of a mind that looks at big problems, and CI, as you just said, is really a big problem. And it requires some pretty, good intellect to solve. I remember Colonel Colton, Scott Colton, used to kind of joke about us being the process guys, if you recall. And I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not necessarily, but I think we did bring some process to it. I think that's one thing that you did really well. Talk a little bit about kind of how CI has fit your mentality and the way you kind of approach problems, and I think you did really well with that, and I'm just interested in kind of your perspective on that processes.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think you and I, we served at a very interesting time. Jeremy, you as well too, to include FCA. We got to see. I got to see CI as specifically, FCA's mission, kind of strategic counterintelligence operations, really mature a lot. I'm not taking anything away, and quite frankly, the people, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and there's a lot of big names out there. Y'all have spoken with some of them, right? Some of them are working with you. That they built this thing, and it was, it has a ton of capability and those sorts of things. But I always, and I think, I think, like you said, that, you kind of implied Scott's kind of like that backhanded compliment of process guys, but he was kind of a process guy of himself, just secretly, right? But I think that was the thing that was kind of keeping it back. There's a maturity level there that we saw where we started to kind of really look at quality over quantity and how much, and that was some of that early days was looking at it. One of the things that like you said, coming from combat arms or coming from a different discipline, coming from a different part of the Army, you learn the vernacular, you learn what is important to that S3, to that operations officer, right? And you realize too that, quite frankly, and I love CI, I spent the bulk of my career in it, but I realized that like nobody cares about CI but us. Nobody. They care about it when it goes wrong. And just like I said, I just finished my career at a combatant command, right? Where they're going to tell you that it's important and those sorts of things, but it is about they don't necessarily care, and we don't do ourselves any justice by kind of trying to stay in the shadows as well. And so that ability to kind of translate that, to be able to kind of qualify and quantify our successes, and to be able to speak the language that they speak helps. And if you can develop the processes and the policies and systems that mimic theirs and or take advantage of theirs, and I tell you, I had to bring this to SOUTHCOM as well, that as a CI, as a discipline, humans the same way, we tend to get very myopic and we get stovepiped, and we tend to focus on our systems and processes, and we forget that we're part of a larger service, we're part of a larger enterprise. And those processes and procedures affect us and apply to us as well. And if we were just to lean into it, and if we were just to participate at some level, we're going to find that the rest of that system, the rest of that enterprise, the rest of that organization is going to view us as what we've always wanted to be, which is partners. They'll view us as a partner because when they're sitting there in the conference room on, hour 47 of some mission analysis thing, and there's the CI guy, right? And you're contributing and those sorts of things, you're going to find that you win friends, most importantly, you're in the moment where resource decisions are made. It's in planning when they only have 50 of these things and they're divvying them out. And if you're not in that room, and I saw this at a combatant command, I saw this at a theater army, if you're not in that room, then you're forgotten about. And then you have to spend, now the plan's approved, we're in execution phase, CI and human wakes up because the 2X wasn't involved. And now you're realizing, we weren't told that you're going to this country. We weren't told that you're doing, and then, well, yeah, you weren't told because you weren't there. And you didn't want to be there. And when we said we need somebody, you said, I don't have enough people. And, we tend to kind of play that game quite a bit. And so that kind of strategic thinking, resource optimization, the kind of enterprise risk oversight, kind of integrating into that planning and bringing some of that rigor into CI, I believe helped in some of the commands that I had and some of the teams that we had and those sorts of things. And I think it helped our ops to a certain extent, though you could probably argue that. The ops are the ops, and I think, they have their own kind of, path. But I think the organizations that I led, and in some cases stabilizing fragile organizations, they benefited from integrating in more, kind of more rigor, more deliberate thought and stuff.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job of kind of bridging the gap between, what we thought was important and then what the rest of the Army thought was important, and the ability to show success, the ability to show value, even within INSCOM, quite frankly. I mean, that INSCOM commander had 15, 16 subordinate brigades, and we would always assume that he or she thought that what we were doing was just as important as all of that, right? And our ability to kind of show value and to be able to understand the big picture, I think really benefited us in the long run. So I really
and I'll tell you, absolutely. So I was there. Obviously, as we know, Army Counterintelligence Command is undergoing their pilots. They are redefining their relationship with FORCECOM, with the rest of the Army and the CI forces in that Army, in the larger force. And they're doing great things at ACIC, right? I'll tell you, when we did the pilot, we were one of the first ones to raise our hand and say, SOUTHCOM wants to be part of this, 470th, et cetera. And I tell you what, when it came time for requirements, you would have been proud. I threw the kitchen sink at it, and I did a lot of personal planning and stuff. And so when you looked at what the other two theaters provided in terms of requirements and what I did, it was night and day. I mean, they had like a single page. I had like spreadsheets, multiple. I mean, like they were like, Jesus, man, we can't do all this. And I'm like, but this is the requirement. And so in a lot of ways, it advantaged my command, right? Because I think I believe we got more out of our pilot than other pilots. And of course, if you were sitting in AFRICOM or Southern, Africa, U.S. Army Africa, or if you're sitting over in Korea, you might think differently. But I'll tell you, we got a lot of benefit out of it, and I think the Army got a lot of benefit out of it with the Joint Force, because we really dug deep and we aligned what CI should be doing with what the command cared about. Because I'll tell you, CI thinks it knows in a lot of cases, right? To include if this is an organization, if you're sitting within IBM or Amazon or insert a company, you think you kind of know, but I'll tell you, you might not. And I'll tell you, these requirements change on a dime, as we're seeing with something like SOUTHCOM, right? We were all in great power competition and all kinds of things, and then it became something else very rapidly.
Yeah, Lee, I love that. Here you are at SOUTHCOM, a CI professional doing the kick a job. What a novel concept, instead of an all source individual thrown into this. But I want to go back to 2009, I believe. What regiment were you in, first of all?
What are you talking about? Which regiment?
Which regiment with the Cavalry?
So I worked 1-7, I did 4-7, 3-7, I did 2 ACR briefly. And then we took 2 ACR and moved them to Lewis, and it became a striker brigade. And so then I became and I think we were 5-1 Cav. So I did a couple of different other Cavs.
Okay, gotcha. No, thank you for that. As you transition, from that kind of tactical focus of Cav to counterintelligence, what did you learn, or what advice? I've got two-part question. What did you learn that you took from that experience to apply to now strategic counterintelligence, I suspect is a first counterintelligence gig? And then what advice can you give individuals along that same path?
Yeah, I think, again, I kind of spoke to it briefly earlier. The biggest thing was starting out in combat arms, or starting out in a different part of the Army. You learn what the Army is really all about, right? It's like the infantry. I think, Jeremy, you were infantry, right? I think, Queen of Battle, follow me, right? It's at the end of the day, the Army has a mission. It revolves around the infantry. It revolves around fighting and winning our nation's wars, right? And anything other than that becomes, it becomes ancillary. It becomes enabling. It becomes something that needs to be focused on that. Now, CI is an interesting discipline where it straddles simultaneously the tactical, the operational, and strategic, right? So you need to be paying attention. Yes, as we're looking at, as the Army and the Department of Defense War looks at the future, and we look at large scale combat operations, the list goes, we look at multi-domain operations, organizations like ACIC, organizations like AOG, human CI across, NCIS, OSI, they're going to have to refresh their memory of some of the early stages of our wars, World War II, and other things, where you're going to have portions of your organization purely focused on the tactical, right? There's going to need to be CI and human forces forward, like supporting the tactical forces on that front line of your troops, right? Speeding to the rear, doing that kind of interrogation and CI interrogations, right? Counterintelligence exploitation as well as human exploitation. But at the same time, you're going to stumble across something that's going to have operational impact at the core level, at the theater Army level, at the joint level. And then, of course, you're going to be working, or you're going to be solving a problem that is, quite frankly, strategic in nature, because it's multi-domain. So there's going to be cyber activities going on. There's going to be something that's happening at a port from the RSOI perspective that's going to reach back to the deep fight, back to the adversary's home country, or across the cyber domain, et cetera. So CI people really do need to be extremely curious. They need to be mentally flexible, and I think that, at least from my perspective, Cavalry really it forged that in us very early on. From basic training, we had a longer OSET than many people have. We were having to, as a young second platoon leader. As a second lieutenant platoon leader, as a scout platoon leader, I had to manage 4 separate nets. I had to manage my vehicles. During the fight, we would get tank platoons attached that I would have, employment or operational oversight over. We would have mortar sections. We'd have all kinds of, helicopter, spurs, all kinds of different things. And it really got you to be thinking quickly, flexibly, and with a curiosity. What is that thing happening over there? I can't see it, my weapon systems can't see it, but I know I got helicopter. Let's send a helicopter over there, right? But I got to be careful because I can't have the helicopter go too far forward, because if he's down, then I can't get to it, right? I mean, so you've got to think. Oh, and then I've got one of my nets of the four that I'm managing is also screaming at me for some other thing that's happening over here. And so it kind of gave me a flexibility of mind and thought process. And of course, infantry people have that as well. I mean, there's a lot of different great jobs in the Army, which is what I love so much about it. From my perspective, cavalry was very, very critical. And so to even something as simple as surveillance, right? We all went to surveillance. And of course, I have my own experience with surveillance, but I'll tell you, just from a getting it done perspective, I ate that course alive, because I mean, multi-mode, multi-comms, surveillance was nothing to me. Managing multiple cars and multiple radios and that was nothing. I mean, it was very easy. So it was an easy transition. I just had to get my ego in check, which is hard.
Oh, I appreciate that, Lee. Thank you. Setting the foundation early on. So as you transition, well, hold on, before I do that, right? From the cavalry perspective, I agree with you, having spent a previous career as field artillery, to learn and understand the Army and why we do counterintelligence. I think it's pretty important. Getting your boots muddy, sleeping out in a shelter half, being engaged with soldiers. You understand, or at least I did, and I suspect you did, Isley. You understand what you do this for. What this craft of counterintelligence is intended to do is to protect the soldier on the ground, because we are a support function to the warfighter. Lee, as you made that transition, now here you are. You've taken off your military uniform, for the most part, to wear a suit or a sweater vest. There's probably a story in there, but I'll let Dave tell it. But how did you make that transition, and what did you think as a brand new captain, not a new captain, but as a captain in a strategic unit in downtown Stuttgart, Germany?
Yeah, great question. I knew I needed to be humble. I knew I needed to come in. I knew that back in those days, you'll remember, you didn't even really know what you were signing up for. I mean, I happened to know someone, and we had a few conversations, and then someone else told me to read a book. And I remember I walked into my first commander, and he's like, "What is this all about?" And I regurgitated, this book that I had read, and they're like, "That's not what we do." And I was like, "Okay, man, I don't know." So I knew I was going to be learning a new craft, and for me, at least anyway, I knew I needed to kind of go back into enlisted mode, and I needed to, what we teach our leaders in the Army as well, which is you need to be a good follower before you can be a good leader. And I knew I needed to do that. And so I hope that you guys experienced that. I hope that I came in with the right mindset. I can remember joking with you, Jeremy, I've said this in many times throughout my career that, you kind of taught me my craft. And I used to joke about carrying your luggage, through Germany. And I meant that, right? I mean, because I didn't care if you were a warrant officer. I didn't care if you were, Wade Wilson. I don't care if you were a master sergeant or whatever it was. I was going to listen to you, and I was going to heed your expertise, because you had more reps than I did. And so that was the mindset I went into, is I need to learn how to follow again, and in the right way. And I hope I did that.
Yeah, 100%. I saw you through that time period, right, as my second tour, your first, and just to see you grow and flourish. And I want to bring a story up, but before I do that, what book was that, Lee? I'm going to put you on the spot, that you read that I said, "Get out of here. That's not what we do."
I think it was Traitors Amongst Us. I think
it's a very good book by Stu Harrington. Good book.
Yeah, and that's and actually it was somebody else, one of our teammates there had told me to, as kind of like a sponsorship, hey, read this book. But I look back on it now, and the person that said that to me, they were not necessarily a part of our craft, so I don't really take it. I was like, yeah, well, okay, whatever.
Yeah, I think that book was based more on an investigation, and I think that was the point. But during the time that it was, that it happened, FCA was all one big organization there.
Yep.
Yeah. So, hey, like I said, I think you did a great job of kind of, one of the unique things about FCA is that it's one of the few military organizations where it's experience-based versus rank and those types of things. And I thought you did that very well. But what were some of the challenges of that? I mean, you were coming, how did that transition affect you? And I know for some folks coming out of the quote unquote, the big Army, into our quote unquote special unit and unit that kind of does this unique thing. What was the transition like? How did you feel about that?
I loved it. And so it was definitely, I can look back on my career now and one of the things I think is critically important for, professionals that are, kind of operating at that level is you really need to have a self-awareness. You have to have a high emotional kind of IQ. And I've ultimately over time have been able to develop that. But you have to, what I've realized, I bring that up to say, I look back on myself and I probably would not have made it as far or been as successful if I'd have stayed in armor or something like that. There was always a part of me that wanted to have larger impact, to see more, kind of see across, the service at a wider level. And quite frankly, to be able to do it on my own terms, which is not what the Army's about. And I'm not saying that places like FCA or ACIC or these, I'm not saying that these places aren't, full of rigor, full of protocol, full of discipline, but you get given a longer leash in some cases as a special agent, right? Especially at certain levels and those sorts of things. And I really gravitated towards that. I wanted someone to say, this is your thing, man. And if it succeeds or fails, it's on you. And, I watched that. I watched it on my own. I was learning a lot. I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on the ground. But I all things being considered, I spent quite a long time, but I wish I had done more because I would have liked to have seen, it took me my multiple different leadership floors to kind of see all the different aspects and nuances of the operational cycle and those sorts of things. And then to really realize, now I look back on it, I'm like, man, I'd love to go back as a MySEP 13 and, do it again, because it would be, I know what I'm doing now and man, I could get that thing going. Right. But anyway, yeah. So to me, the transition was fine. I had to, just the normal stuff, we're not Jason Bourne and we're not this and we're not that. And I had to kind of feel that out. Luckily, we had some really great leaders that allowed us to make mistakes, to break things, and then to repair it on our own. Right. I mean, I remember, being able to recruit somebody, which had been this onerous process. I can remember under Scott, it was like, yeah, man, if you want to not necessarily recruit, what I mean is to be able to sign up for a SERL, right? Hey, you want to go do that? Great. But you break it, you bought it. And if it don't work out, and I remember me and Jeremy were on a thing where same thing. It was like, we had that ability. And I kind of like, to let your people grow and develop, let them exercise disciplined initiative and then respond appropriately when things go well and when things don't go well. And that was something that I saw a lot of negative of, but I also saw some positives too. And so again, it gets back to the old saw, you learn from everyone. You learn from the good and you learn from the bad as well. And there was definitely plenty of both in FCA at the time.
Yeah, I think, what's unique is that, you do get to learn from everybody. And you came through at a time where you were able to kind of get a full tour as a commissioned officer. And not everybody did. When I was the ops officer at Det 14, I had a series of captains come through that would just barely get, a year or so. And then they'd have to go take command someplace. And obviously they had to go make sure that they were promotable. So, I certainly didn't fault them for that, but it was almost more unique that you got to get a full ops tour under your belt before you had to go take care of your Army officer.
And that's the importance of kind of broadening it, because I shared the same thing. And when I was inside of FCA, we spent a long time there. It becomes an echo chamber. You begin to think that there's reasons for it, but the further away you get from something, and then like when I went to AFSC, and was there, like you get to understand that there are larger Army issues at play here that forces that there are decisions that are being forced on commanders at all echelons to make decisions. But what I also realized is that we can change that. So like at FSC, we could, if we just did this, if we just were able to get this to be a functional area, or if we could get floors and ceilings, or if we could just do this, or if you could make these functional changes to how big MI works, how the Army, HRC works, G1, et cetera, you could have that thing that you wanted, that thing that existed long ago, back when it was this little small closet in the Pentagon or whatever, right? I mean, you can get to that. You can have scale, but you've got to, again, getting back to the theme, you've got to have the relationships. You've got to be speaking their language. you're not cloak and dagger. You're an Army person coming in to talk about an issue that impacts the United States Army as a whole, and most importantly, the soldiers that work in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, in the interest of time, we have about 25, 30 minutes left. I do want to make sure that we get your story and kind of your complete story. So we've kind of gotten you through, that first tour at FCA. Tell us a little bit more about what happened next. What were some of your follow-on assignments, and what did you get out of those?
Yeah, so I was very lucky to then go and command Det 16. And so I went out to Hawaii. I thought I was, there was many times in my career where the conventional wisdom was like, man, you're going to go do this. You're going to go do this. And then at every time someone would say that, it would be the exact opposite. And so I went very luckily to go command Det 16, I think at an early time. That was a great command. I had really one great year of greatness. And then, there were some changes that were occurring inside of INSCOM, inside of the 902nd at the time. And so that kind of took over and kind of led the latter part of my time as a commander at Det 16. I left there, then went into DIA, and I did a couple gigs in DIA, a couple different organizations, again, broadening me out, which really made all the difference in my perspective of how CI works as an enterprise level across the Department of Defense. And so that was super helpful. Went back to AFSC, deputy commander there. That was incredibly eye-opening again. I learned far more about my own craft. I learned far more about the other disciplines that work alongside us and how they interplay, how the larger Army works, how it could work better, how we could help make it better. Then, third command, at NATO, Allied Technical Operations activity with the 650th, a great tour, back working with NATO, working with our partners. And I tell you, I had worked partnerships with people before, but not like this. It was amazing. And what I learned was just the value of allies and partners. I learned, especially along the eastern flank, NATO's eastern flank, that those people, many of whom, learned their craft from, the KGB, right? From KGB training courses, right? Like, these individuals knew their adversary better than we would ever hope to know these adversaries. They were world-class professionals who would work as fast, as hard as you wanted. They understood our limitations. They were, great. Now, everybody's, individual, there are high spots and low spots, but for the most part, a great group of allies and partners there in Europe. And I learned so much there. Then after that, was closing in on retirement, and so went to SOUTHCOM, had a great opportunity to be a command kicker there. That was, man, I almost wish I could have done, a couple more years there, because I was learning so much. Especially, I really focused a lot more on working with our Air Force partners and our Navy partners. And I got to understand how the other services work at a much deeper level. And I learned that not all equities are the same, and it doesn't mean they're bad or good. It just means they're different. And how you get, multiple external organizations to work together is an art form. And it really starts with how can I make this successful for you? Obviously, out of command, I'm paid to make sure this command and the people and the resources that we're responsible for protecting. But really, the big thing was, how do I make it worth your while? NCIS, OSI, et cetera.
I do have a follow-up question for the SOUTHCOM, your time at SOUTHCOM. I mean, for many years, SOUTHCOM was kind of the counter-drug command, and NORTHCOM was kind of the Homeland Security command. But that's all changed, as you've kind of alluded to. Talk a little bit about that change and, kind of how you were a part of that.
There was a good friend that I spoke with quite a bit, was the command kicker at AFRICOM, Jim Beckett, and a lot of us know Jim. And I had served with him at AFSC, so we kind of had a pre-existing relationship. And then, what I learned very early on in Great Power Competition was that, the global South, right, Africa, Latin America, and these, developing whatever words you want to use, and the other parts of the world, our adversaries are beating us hands down, absolutely beating us hands down. And so when I got there, again, getting back to CI and human as disciplines that are myopic and inward looking, really only caring about their investigate, really only caring about their sources, really only, right? And resistant to working within the command and trying to participate in some of those repetitions. When where's our strategy at? Where's our annex to this plan? Where's it at? And I would get it, and it would be 10 years old. It would be poorly written. It would be completely not relevant anymore, and just not good. And so that's my first year was rewriting everything, meeting with the planners, going back. What is SOUTHCOM there for? SOUTHCOM, a lot of people view it as the counter drug command, and quite frankly, the money that it does have flows from. It's kind of, the front lines of homeland defense and counter drug operations. But really, ultimately, at the end of the day, right, when things go bad, right, we're there to ensure that we have some sea lines of control, right? Like, we're there to make sure that our hemisphere is an enabling hemisphere for maybe a larger conflict in some other theater, right? And so we really had to have our systems in place and the relationships in place. So the command had already turned that way in 2019. The 2X was dragging into it and paying lip service. I think if I did anything, it was really turn us as a 2X harder into it and really redefine our requirements for that, and to make sure that when we were communicating with Army South, Air Force South, or whatever, when we were communicating with our services, our Title 10 forces, that we were telling them things that were relevant to the combatant commander. And if it's relevant to the combatant commander, it means it's relevant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's relevant to the Secretary of Defense, it's relevant to the commander, right? To the Commander in Chief. And so I got to see that. And so we spent a lot of time getting this, turned on to great power competition. And then, of course, as SOUTHCOM has experienced many times before, new administration comes in, and now we're kind of back to illegal immigration, or irregular immigration, whatever the term du jour is right now, and kind of getting back into drugs as well. Regardless, if that's the mission, that's the mission. But you can do both, and I think we're hopefully what they're trying to do now is to kind of cut that fine line between how do we keep an eye, and this is something that, remember, we used to talk about in FCA a lot. Like, yes, I get it. Back, we're kind of dating ourselves, but remember when someone looked into someone's eyes and saw their soul, and we're friends with the Russians, and there was a conversation within some disciplines to be like, yeah, but someone's got to keep watch over our adversary, right? And you can do that with just a small discipline like CI. Hopefully, CI is winning that fight and able to say not only contribute to irregular migration, to contribute to counter drug and those sorts of things, but at the same time, never forgetting that we do have adversaries out there. They are working in these theaters. They are beating us in these theaters, and we really need to be paying attention to what they're doing, so that when administrations change, or when we gear shift, or we change into some other kind of an operation, someone has been watching and building up that intel summary, right, or that assessment that says, here's where they're at, here's what they're doing, and here's, if we want to get after them, here's what we need to do. Here's the resources we need. Hopefully, they're doing that.
Yeah, I'm hopeful as well, and hopefully they're using all functions of counterintelligence. I want to echo a couple different things that you just said, Lee. Number one, you dusted off that 10-year-old plan and you updated it. That goes back to you being a CI subject matter expert in SOUTHCOM, probably one of the first ones from the program where we're a part of. But looking at large, as you move up in rank, those are the positions you should hold. You should be selling the risk to the commander through the eyes of a counterintelligence and by proxy human intelligence professional, but selling it in the way to the commander in the words that they understand and endure. And so first, your ability to do that, I saw your ability to take very complex CI language, break it down into CAV speak, if you will, so the commander understands the adversary is finding, and you're all about finding and fixing the adversary, using the terms that they understand. And I applaud that, Lee. And I'm hopeful that that model will continue, where your expertise, or your peers, and now the follow-on people that are going to fill your shoes, take those hard positions and sell that risk to the commander.
Absolutely. And you've got to look for your opportunities. And so you kind of ground up, I developed relationships at the 06 level, with the J35, the 3-4. I mean, I had a lot of relationships in the 3 side of the house. Of course, I had to have the 2 because that's my world. But the 3 was critically important to me, and mainly because of resources at the combatant command level. You're working very closely with your service component commands, but sometimes you're fighting with them, right? Because they think they know what's right. And it's mainly because, kind of to your point, like, this is something I always wish our program members had better representation within our Army service component commands, within our theater armies. I wish we were better represented at corps. I wouldn't go below that, but definitely corps, definitely theater Army commands. I'd like to kind of do that. I think it would be very good for us to include spreading out a lot of this 2X love, which we see definitely on the human side. We could kind of continue to do that, but you got to find your opportunities. While I was there, a long-term cold case file was brought up, and we actually, partnered. Army Counterintelligence Command partnered with FBI, and so I got to see and brief the arrest of a former U.S. ambassador to Bolivia, Victor Manuel Rocha. And so, that was all over the news, et cetera. And that was one of the few times that I was able to get in front of, right, as a CI guy, along with I was following the FBI, quite frankly. But that was a moment in time when we're meeting with the combatant commander, right? There are very few moments when you get to meet the combatant commander, when you get to have those kind of interactions. And so this is really all they know about you. It's like, oh, boom, it's a spy investigation. It's in the news. And guess what? The combatant commander was leaving that day to go to testify on the Hill. What questions do you think they were going to be getting, right? And they didn't know nothing about it, right? So there's a lot of this spin up with the FBI and trying to get them to understand, hey, this is what's happening, this is what's going to happen, et cetera. But that was an opportunity to kind of work with them and then their larger team to get them to understand CI, understand why, and why. Well, because this is the same group of people that didn't want us to have TSCM go with them, or they're traveling throughout theater or these other disciplines of CI. I was having to struggle to get them to understand the reality of why they needed CI in their formations. When you have a situation like Rocha, you're able to say, this is why. Because he spent 40 plus years at the highest levels of our government and Department of State, and the entire time he was a mouthpiece for Cuba, right? And so, boom, it sells itself, game over, right? And then now, let me talk to you about the programs that we currently have going on to prevent the next Rocha. But I've got some challenges, sir, ma'am. Let me talk to you about this resource. Let me talk to you about I need you to clear the path for me with this group of people. Or I need you to invite, don't forget the power of someone else's rank, right? Can you invite this person to come here? And so I was able to do that with our two a couple times, like have them invite the chiefs of the services to come in, and then let's talk about how we're going to work together.
So as you're talking, Lee, I can see kind of a glitter in your eye, man. You really enjoy this stuff, and that's what I've always really respected about you is you're a big thinker, and you combine that with your ability to have all this exposure to interagency, multi commands, joint commands, and those types of things. I'd really like to get your perspective on kind of what's been in the news the last 6 to 8 months about kind of national level CI reform, right? What do you think about that? The push maybe for a national counterintelligence center, maybe FBI becomes a little bit less of a player in the CI realm. I'm just really interested in your perspective on that.
I think it's a long time in coming. We've needed, comprehensive CI reform, just simply at a department level for quite some time. We're dealing with some policies that need to be updated. Jeremy, I listened to, we were talking earlier about Mark DuPont's episode. Very interesting to see where he ended up. I disagreed with him, about what he saw the future might looking like from a compliance perspective, kind of gathering these things together, or whatever. But what I think we would share, is that we need that reform. Counterintelligence really needs to kind of be unfettered in a way. We also have to understand too, where we stand is influenced by where we sit. We're coming from the Department of Defense, Department of War, whatever you want to call it, right? Our Constitution wants to keep us in check, right? Posse comitatus and these sorts of things, right? I mean, there were some legitimate things, like they want defense to be in a certain bucket. And I agree with that. However, a lot of our careers were shaped overseas. And I think that, kind of getting that, having the Department of Defense's, reform and allowing us to do far more overseas and those sorts of things, and having more flexibility, streamlining policies, et cetera, would be very important. Anything we can do at a national level to refine, because a lot of these restrictions at an agency level, at a department level, are built because of what Congress has, right? So it's some title, some code that says you can or you can't, thou shalt, thou must not, right? And so we do need some of that reform as well to kind of streamline downstream the policies and procedures that would affect, the future special agents out there, human collectors, whatever it is. And resourcing, that's another huge one there, right? Is that being able to get the kind of resources that we need. Again, CI tends to continue to be a little myopic about espionage. Counterintelligence truly is. It is multidiscipline, right? I mean, it's counter SIGINT, it's counter, right? And then it's counter all these things, right? And there's a lot of pieces to counterintelligence. And so it is more than just a spy, and it is more than investigations. I know that's not popular with some of our friends, but investigations are critical, right? That's closing that gap, plugging that hole. But investigations aren't everything. And so we spent a career in FCA and other places trying to get left of theft or left of the bang or whatever you want to call it, right? Getting aggressive, getting proactive. And you've got to have a portion of your portfolio that is that, but it also has to be multi-domain. And we need to clarify some of these issues at a very high level. We've done this before, right? We've had, consolidated CI organizations and some might say some of the failings of these in the past were, resourcing and stuff like that. What you see now and what I saw at an enterprise level is that, there's ups and there's downs, and like DIA is hiring now, and like the Army's not, and the Navy, and what you see is a brain drain, right? Because there's only so many people right now. We're only educating and creating and have the resources for so many of us that you get a brain drain. And so and that's what, it's a conscious choice. This is what happens. Like, we need to throw more money at it. We need more 14s, or we need more, or whatever that is. And so you'll see OCI, suck the brains out of, all the other services, or you'll see the Navy rebuilding, and then boom, and a lot of people, go there. It's a little bit different going between Air Force and Navy and the other services because of some of the law enforcement components, but it's still possible, and it does flow both ways. You see this on the civilian side quite a bit, and I see this at the combatant command levels, the joint level, quite a bit as well too. So CI reforms very well needed. We're starting to get the right kind of people in there, and Dixon and crew. There's a lot of people up there right now who understand at a deep level what CI is, what it isn't, how it should be used, how it shouldn't be used. And I'm very interested in seeing it. I know that you guys have been talking about, who owns education and where's our tradecraft standards and those sorts of things. And I agree that I think that, there's a utility in having a kind of a place for that. Where that ends up, who knows? But I think there's a lot to be said about the DoD owning it, or in some way, shape, or form, or the FBI or whatever, because we just do it so much better. And yes, CIA does these things, but not quite the same, and not with the same resources. FBI does it, but again, different equities, different viewpoints, different end states. You really truly get, I think, a good view of it somewhere between the FBI and DoD.
Yeah, I think we need a whole new episode just to talk through this, Lee. Nobody owns the counterintelligence tradecraft. There are 5 functions out there, and every service, every IC partner or entity out there in the corporate world, everybody does it differently. When you're doing it differently, that's problematic. This is how the adversary is able to exploit gaps and seed themselves through our society, which has been systemic for years now, as we turned a blind eye and really focused on the kind of the Middle East area, and now refocusing back here. So I love Chairman Crawford's effort at the Secure Act and what him and his staff are trying to do at HPSI. But Lee, I want to transition real quick, if I may. So 26 years, you're now at the University of Florida doing employee relations and engagements. What does that mean, and how did you use your counterintelligence skill sets to help this organization?
So great. I think, it's still kind of there's still an element of unknown. I'm fairly new here at the university. There are places that are much more aligned, right? And so there are foreign influence sections. Every university has them, right? You have to have foreign influence. There's a lot of CFIUS laws. There's a lot of federal laws that dictate how academia operates, and of course they have their own relationships. We have FSOs. There's clear defense contracting research that goes on. Our university is expanding that effort moving forward as well. But there's a lot of opportunity. And so what I've been really enjoying is to be able to kind of learn HR, which I never thought in a million years I'd be doing, but to see the overlap. And a couple of things I want to highlight here, because I think this is where we kind of get relevance to a larger community here than just Army folks that want to hear Lee's nasally voice. And that's, HR and the compliance structures within that, whether it's Title IX, ADA, whether it's the general counsels, they have co-compliance sections, et cetera. They manage behavior. They manage human risk just like we do, right? but they manage it. CI, I viewed always as anticipating it, right? They're built to handle issues after they surface for the most part. Now, HR and compliance, they do have forward-looking. They are trying to develop, strong workplace cultures and education and all those sort of things. But it is a 10% of what they do compared to their day-to-day jobs. But they handle these issues after they occur, performance problems, conflict, misconduct, policy violations, whatever that thing is, right? Their role is to document, apply policy, transparency, to keep the organization legal and procedurally stable, right? Their high workload makes it extremely hard for your HR professionals to spot these indicators. Even if they did have, and they're sitting on top of all the data. I know you know this at IXM. They're sitting on all the data, right? And they guard it very fiercely, as they should, because there's laws that say they have to. But they don't have the times to do that, right? This is where I see, and I've heard you guys and Ryan and others talk about CI programs inside of the private sector. I believe it's true there's a version of this that can happen in academia, thing I'm going to be interested in pursuing and researching, as my second career here. But CI fills that gap. All those things we talked about, right? HR ensures, that their responses stay lawful and consistent, but CI brings that forward mindset, right? We're the ones that are kind of connecting that small signals. We're questioning the patterns. We're identifying vulnerabilities early before something happens that needs HR to come in and do some progressive discipline or dismissal or whatever that thing is. Insider risk programs, I think, kind of sit at that hub, right? I mean, so I was responding. We had to build an insider threat program at SOUTHCOM during my time there, and we had to kind of like grab it because it was actually someone else's job. It was J2 Sec's job, but for a variety of reasons, we had to kind of build it. We had to build it and then start the hub and then hand it over to them, right? To include hiring and all those sorts of things. And it's that hub, bringing those partnerships together, whether that's your general counsel, your security folks, your insider risk, your CI perhaps, right? Definitely your HR and leadership together. That's where it all kind of happens, right? So you need HRs because they understand the behavior and the policy, right? And they have the authority inside of the large organizations, that senior vice president for human resources or whoever that title is, that C-suite HR person, they are the people making the decisions. And you've seen this if you've been working in the private sector. There's a CEO, there's a COO, but who's right next to them and who are they looking at? They're looking at their chief of HR saying, we need to fire him. And you're saying, but no. If we just did it, they're like, fire it, cut it, clean it out right now. And I've seen that in terms of risk. Let's nip it quickly and move forward, right? I think there's room there, but you really have to understand what HR is, the power that they hold, and how to develop that relationship. It's a critical relationship. I'm sure you guys know that. Compliance is there, the legal and procedural rigor, security and IT. Of course, IT, I forgot to mention IT as well, right? They're the ones, obviously, access and privilege. Hopefully they're running a zero trust architecture within the organization that you're looking to get into so that you're not maximizing the kind of lateral damage that can happen if you do have an insider or some sort of a cyber thing going on. But I think it's really, what I'm seeing now, what we can bring to the table is our ability to kind of anticipate problems before they escalate. And we can bring value to our partners in the private sector. We're a cost center just like HR is, but we can do a lot for them. Zero trust is really critical to that. What ties us all together, in my opinion, is kind of consistency and fairness. This is something that we've got to, we can't bring our Army thoughts, our NCIS thoughts, our FBI thoughts into the private sector and continue to do it. In fact, there's tons and tons and tons of vignettes where former FBI guy got, former NCIS guy, former, because they came in there, thought they still had a badge, thought they still had authorities that they do not have, and they got themselves and their organization in a lot of trouble, a lot of legal exposure, right? So building consistency, educating our leaders, educating ourselves on what everybody else does in their authorities, where we fit. We're not where we think we fit, right? Our power is a lot different. But that becomes important as well. That cross-functional communication, developing those relationships, which I know IXN and you guys are doing quite a bit of. All of these things are going to bring a strong organization. So I tell you, there's a ton of overlap. There's a ton of opportunity there. We just have to crack that code to get them to understand, like, let us let us into the databases, let us into, at whatever appropriate level, so that we can be your eyes and ears, identifying those vulnerabilities early on. Not just vulnerabilities about they're stealing your intellectual property, but you're also going to be able to find things that they care about, right? Maladaptive behavior, poor leadership qualities. You're going to be able to find things in their performance management systems and others where you're able to help them clear out toxic, counterproductive leadership, maladaptive behavior, the things that HR cares about as well too.
Yeah, Lee, good Lord, that's a lot of knowledge you just dropped on us. I want to echo what Ryan says often, who echoes it from Don Kleppel. CI is the glue that binds all of this together. That's exactly what you're describing to me. You said something I found pretty curious, an FSO at a university. So what challenges are you facing of counterintelligence in academia?
So, I mean, it's out there, it's kind of bend under, they don't view it in those terms. To be honest with you, I don't have that level of visibility on those issues, right? Where I currently sit. I would see the tail end of it, right? I would see the dismissal portion of it, right? We actually have foreign influence, right? Because especially in what they call Carnegie R1 high investment research organizations, and my university happens to be one of these. These are large organizations that are doing a ton of research. They're taking in a lot of grants, some of it external funding, et cetera. They talk in terms of foreign influence, right? Because this is what the government is asked of us, right? Or has told us. So I think they realize it. They understand it. There are travel training programs. Some of those are better than others. There are some that are really good. In fact, I had applied to one out of the university in Georgia early on in my kind of retirement look, because I thought that was a natural kind of a place as well. I'm still looking at that kind of natural home as well, of like, where could I really take advantage of all that? I think foreign influence inside of the compliance structures within academia is where I think we'll see, because they have their own investigations. HR, we have investigations. HRs run their own investigations. You have compliance teams that run their own ethical and compliance investigations. They're kind of similar to what we might have experienced, but obviously, much different, and the authorities are different. Really, at the end of the day, all I can do is compel you to talk, and if you don't, then you're fired or whatever. But it's the same kind of the thought processes, and keeping it quiet and legally framed and all those sorts of things. So I think there are issues out there, as we know. In academia, we've got a lot of people on F1, J1 visas who are in, and they're doing great work for the United States. They're doing great work for our country. They're doing great work really for mankind, right? I mean, this is how in academia we think about knowledge is to make all humanity better, right? And so these are kind of a little bit different mindsets to get, and you do confront that, right? There are faculty out there are staff out there that don't understand, and then they view people who come in from the FBI, they view people like us who come in, with that kind of that jaundiced eye, because we view the world in just a different way. We tend to see all the ways in which bad things can happen. They want to tend to view things in like, but this is for the betterment of mankind. And like, if they're here and they're participating, we're just sharing information, and information will set all of us free. And there's an element of truth to that. In fact, the Western civilization is kind of built on some of these precepts, right? But as we know, there are adversaries out there who want to take advantage of that, and they want to run roughshod with intellectual property. And so the universities tend to do exactly, the academic side of the house tends to do exactly what they've been told they must do, and not much more than that. So kind of getting back to CI reform at a national level, you just got to make sure that whatever happens also applies to beyond the DIB, beyond the defense industrial base, beyond defense contracting, et cetera. It really needs to affect our entire economy, right? Just in the way that some of our adversaries do. Our adversaries have these national laws that mobilize their entire economy, right? We do that, but it's for major theater wars, right? I mean, it's World War II, and we mobilize the entire economy. We need to kind of do some of that. We have some of those laws in place right now, but they can be strengthened, I'm sure.
Lee, thank you. We are coming up on time, and I've got one question, and then I'll pass it over to Dave because he probably has some as well. But looking back at your 26 years of service, what recommendation and advice can you give our audience listening?
Thanks for the opportunity. Be operationally curious. No matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing, that's the job you have. That's the best place for you to be right now. Be looking for your next out or whatever you're looking for. But right now, and in everything that you do, be operationally curious. I believe CI officers, I believe the best officers ask better questions than their adversaries expect, right? You're asking the questions that get you to ask more questions, to dig deeper, to do more research, to do more planning, to run that op that they'll never see coming. So be operationally curious. Never work in isolation. Remember, there's 10 precepts of CI as well. Some guy, produced, decades ago is one of those. Never work in isolation, right? You get this as an officer. I think you get as more at all grades. You kind of get this as you hit that top level. Your sergeant major, your 4s and 5s, your 05s and 06s and beyond. You realize that organizations can't do it themselves. You have to have partnerships, and those interagency, international, organizational are absolute combat enablers. They're discipline enablers, I think is a better way to put it for our audience. And you have to have them. You cannot do this alone. Your organization is not strong enough. It is not. I saw this in a joint construct. There's a lot of organizations that thought they got it, and I'll tell you, there were a multitude of situations where an Army thing would say, "Hey, Air Force, pay attention to this. Hey, Coast Guard, pay attention to this," or vice versa, right? I think for people who are working as we're taking this discipline and moving inside of risk categories, we're moving inside of HR and trying to get CI programs built. We got to maintain our humanity, right? We got to understand that it's very easy for us. I spent many years in all this, multiple deployments and combat and all those kind of things. We have to understand that our partners view things differently, and that we speak a lot in the HR about giving grace, right? There's sometimes where the policy says we don't have to let them do X, Y, and Z, but we're going to because of some mental issue that's going on, or they're having issues with their lives, their careers, their families. So our precision and our desire to see justice done has to be balanced. Has to be balanced with empathy. And so that's the kind of tone that we need to be striking out in the private sector and outside of government. Invest in the fundamentals, right? Question assumptions, which I already kind of talked about. You need to be able to write clear. You need to be able to communicate risk with precision. This is the biggest, at my level, the difference between successful 05s, 06s, and beyond. The people that made it to general or who didn't, that were people that could communicate risk with precision and in a way that resonated with the commander. And you didn't. There wasn't hyperbole. You weren't saying things you didn't even understand. You went in there ready and you spoke with precision. Protect your credibility. We all know that once your credibility is gone, you are done. So this is a very small community, and so you got to protect your credibility. And then I guess seek out. Last thing I'll say is for early career professionals, seek out assignments that stretch you, not just convenient or prestigious ones. I was very lucky. I dumb lucked into it. Either the music stopped and I just happened to be standing in front of a chair, or some other butterfly flapped his wings in the Pacific and I got affected by it, or just the way things happen. But it always put me in places that because I was curious, made me a better officer, made me a better special agent. And so that's what I would say. Don't when I first got into FCA, I learned here's what you got to do to be the commander of FCA. You're going to do this. You're going to be you're going to be an executive officer. You're going to teach you. You're going to do this. You're going to be S3. You're going to do that. And then you're going to be the commander, right? And then none of that happened, right? And I didn't even really see it happen with many people, because that's just not how life works. It sounds good, but we're not an intel unit. This isn't infantry battalion. That's not how things work. And so, looking to broaden yourself and your discipline and your art.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of great advice, and I think you lived all that throughout your career. What kind of struck me is you mentioned a little bit about culture and kind of the environment you're in, an academic environment. I think one of our challenges is trying to be able to balance, open academic environments with our CI perspective, right? Instead of us hiding in the shadows and jumping out with a rule book every once in a while, how do we build this culture from the top down and from the bottom up as well, that kind of supports academia in what their real mission is, in a responsible way that kind of keeps counterintelligence, at the forefront. And how do we do that? And you talked about, doing it with some grace and doing it with some exceptions to policies rather than always being that hard line. So I think CI suffers a little bit from that mystique of being, like I said, jumping out of the shadows and doing all these weird things, when in actuality, all we're trying to do is make the organization better. So that just stuck out to me. I thought that was.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's another thing I was thinking about as we're talking too, and that is we tend to sell like I even mentioned it, like, oh, we can identify problems before they become problems. But that's not how these organizations work. They don't want to find problems. And in fact, the way they view the state laws, the federal laws, the EEOC laws, whatever it is, they view, or here's a new thing I had to learn, the collective bargaining agreements, because you have unions that are represented within some of these organizations, right? They don't want to be digging in and violating people's privacy and their rights, and they don't want to find more problems, right? All it does is expose more risk. So I would just say that, part of it too is you can get there. I think there's a way in which you can say, hey, look, now that we're here, if we can only do this, we could do this. We can make it better. Part of it is I can help you become compliant faster, better, and easier with less resources than you ever did before, right? It's about, I can help you be compliant, and I'll solve the problems that you have, that you grudgingly accept that you have, and then get your foot in the door. Said, oh, get your foot in the door, right? Before they slam it in your face. And then you can kind of broaden out from there once they see how successful some of the programs can be.
Yeah. So obviously we could continue on for another couple hours if we wanted to, but we're coming up on time. If anybody out there, I know you said a lot of great things. If anybody wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do that? What's a good contact?
867-5309 is my number. No, yeah. So I spent a lot of time, on LinkedIn. It was part of my kind of, getting ready for retirement, those sorts of things. I was never on social media before. I actually like, if you really kind of curate your LinkedIn, it works pretty well for you. And so LinkedIn, I'm on there, Roger Lee Dale, University of Florida. If you look ISAR Intelligence, you'll find me there. If you DM me on that, give me a direct message or whatever on LinkedIn. I'm easy to get a hold of. People want to reach out to you and get my email. Absolutely. I'd love to, talk to people I haven't talked to in a while. We were talking about some of our old friends we haven't seen in a long time. And so, yeah, anything I can do to help people out. One of the things I wanted as part of my veterans journey was that I was never going to say no to someone that came to me, a veteran or active duty, retired, whatever. I was going to always help them. And so that's what I'll say to anybody listening here, or to even broaden it out. If you happen to be working in these career professions outside, if there's something I can do to help you, then please reach out.
Lee, I want to echo that, right, to our audience out there. I've seen it firsthand that you're not just about operational curiosity, but you're also protecting people curiosity, if you will. I recall a young Dave Turner and a young Lee Dale coming back from a meeting one evening and saying, you know what, we closed the books, we continued to talk to the individual we were talking with, and a simple question came out. What are you doing this weekend? And he'd mentioned going to the hospital. You could have easily not taken the bait on that question, but you did. And we tell this story to our individuals that we teach out there, and I often emphasize it with young individuals in the counterintelligence profession. Ask the follow-up question, because that follow-up question undoubtedly helped that individual through a very struggling time. So your operational curiosity and what you've kind of themed through your whole story, Lee, is taking care of people. I've seen you do it, and I applaud that. Thank you. Lee, I look back at your career and I had to go back to the 1st Cavalry Regiment motto, courageous and faithful. And the 2nd Regiment is always ready. You may have left the cavalry to endure and go through your counterintelligence career, but those themes stayed with you throughout. 26 years, counterintelligence, from finding and fixing the adversary with the cavalry, leading from the front. You did it in counterintelligence. I saw it firsthand. You weren't just about the operational focus, but protecting the people. From your strategic vision to your broadening assignments, you lobbied for counterintelligence. You sold counterintelligence to senior leaders, not just in the Army, but the broad spectrum of the IC that you supported, joint partners, senior leaders, crafting solutions that help them identify risk. They didn't see it, protecting blind spots. To now, what you're doing at the University of Florida. Lee, I appreciate and thank you for your strategic vision, your foresight, your precision, and your passion. It's inspiring. And I'm so glad we got to work together all those years and we maintain a friendship throughout. Thank you for sharing your story. And we need to keep a better job of keeping in contact, Lee.
I agree. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. This has been, kind of a dream when you guys started doing it. I was like, I want to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was great catching up with you again. We haven't talked in a while, so kind of reminds me of the old days of just sitting around kind of talking about stuff like this. So really enjoyed it. Before I turn it over to Jeremy to kind of close things out, I'm going to give a little shameless plug for a couple things. So if you enjoyed today's episode and want even more behind the scenes insights on counterintelligence and insider threat issues, check out IXN Dispatch on Patreon. That's where we post extra content, analysis, and resources you won't get anywhere else. And our Dispatch Central Discord is open to everyone who wants to keep the discussion going. It's where CI and IC professionals connect, trade perspectives, and stay in the conversation long after the episode ends. And both of those things are going to be linked in our comments below. So really enjoyed it, Lee. Good seeing you again, and we'll talk soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again. And I wish you guys personally, and then I extend all the best.
Well, Dave, thank you for starting the closeout. To our audience out there, check out our website, www.ixnsolutions.com. If you have a CI individual in your family, or if you want to, impress your fellow CI agent, check out our Printify shop. I'm wearing one right now, a No Spy t-shirt. There's some funny quotes on there, and if you know, you know. And most certainly, if you have a topic you want the IXN team to cover down on, send it our way. Better yet, if you want to be a guest, we can most certainly make that happen. Thanks for giving us a listen, and until next time.